Hello, and thank you so much for tuning into this short but snappy tutorial. In this tutorial, I want to talk about a topic that is a little bit more specific. I'm not going to talk about my usual blocking in a painting, the colors I use. I want to talk about how you can mix colors that are of similar value but slightly different hues and color temperatures to still create interest in your painting. Now, I consider this a more advanced technique, and actually painters like Edgar Payne, he does this a lot in his paintings. If you observe his paintings, a lot of the times his sky will be the same value as the light side of his mountains. And I'll turn this painting black and white right now to prove it to you. And I didn't actually realize this until studying his paintings a little bit more in depth. And what I noticed that Edgar Payne does brilliantly is that he will use hue and color vibration to separate two different elements or two different subjects, such as sky or mountain, instead of using value. Now, I know this may be confusing because a lot of the times, and I know I say this all the time, you must have a readable value structure in order for your painting to read, okay? And that still stands true. However, for this painting, for example, okay, let's take a look at the reference photo in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, I want you to squint at this reference photo, okay? And I want you to be able to tell me in your head if you can tell that the greenery in the bushes and the foliage in front of the rocks is about the same value as the shadow side of the rocks, okay? Now this works because both the green, the foliage, and the rocks are in shadow. And so in this specific example, I'm actually able to group all those elements into one value mass, okay? If I were to squint and turn this reference photo black and white, you would actually see that that desaturated green and that desaturated red of the rock are actually similar, very similar value, okay? And so when I'm painting this quick study, this 4x4 study, I'm keeping that in mind. As you can see right now in my painting, I've blocked in my biggest masses, okay? The good thing about painting about sunset around this time is that the sun really carves out those shadows for you, right? There's no question what is in shadow and what is in light, right? The rocks, half of the rocks are in shadow, and a little bit less than half is still being lit by that sun. Most of that, actually I would say all of that river is in shadow, minus some of the reflection that is going on. But I would still say that reflection, you might be tricked to think that it is in the light. It's just reflected light from that mountain, and I would still group it all in a mid value, okay? So these are things I want to talk about that's very nuanced. You might be tricked to think, oh, that's a warm color, right? That's a warm color, and therefore I'm going to make it really light. That reflected warm color of the rock being reflected into the water is a really happy warm color. I'm going to make it extra bright and extra light. You're breaking the value structure, okay? It might be a slightly lighter, but it's honestly not that lighter than the blue part that is being caught by the skylight of the sky, okay? So all this, I treat the whole river in shadow. It's just being affected by little reflected light from the rocks and the light from the sky, okay? Now, the other thing I want to bring up is the light part of the rocks. You can see that triangular part of the rock that is being lit and the sky. This is something that is really tricky and took me a while to kind of get the hang of, okay? If I also turn this reference image black and white, you'll see that that yellow, that more saturated yellow of that rock, right? Because the local color of these rocks in Zion, they carry an already very rich reddish orange color. It's not one color, there's lots of different gradients in the rocks. But in this case, especially it being lit by the warm sun, because evening sun, the setting sun is a very, very warm light, okay? much warmer than a noonday light. So this rock is being lit by a warmer light, and therefore that warmer light is accentuating the already warm tones of this rock. Now you might be fooled to say, oh, that warm side of the rock is way lighter than the blue of the sky, because blue is known, we associate blue with slightly darker, more, I guess, maybe somber color. Sometimes, I mean, a sky is not really somber, but that is kind of the mood we associate blue with, and we associate yellow with being a more happy, vibrant, bright color. However, in this case, because that yellow is slightly darker and more saturated, and that blue is not too dark, the sky is not super dark, it's not an overcast sky, but it is a very solid, kind of mid-value blue. These two values, when I turn it black and white, as you will see now, are actually quite similar in value, okay? So this is a second thing I want to bring up. You know, sometimes you might be fooled to think, oh, I have to make the light side of that rock way lighter. What ends up happening is that you mix a lot of white, and then you end up desaturating the light side of that rock too much, and it lacks vibrancy. Okay, or you make the sky a little bit too dark, and then you you push the value contrast a little bit too much. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm not creating distinction through value, but through hue and temperature. Okay, hue, because blue and yellow are clearly two distinct hues, and temperature, as in yellow is a warmer color and blue is a cooler color, but they actually carry similar value. So this is what I wanted to bring up with this very simple-ish 4x4 painting, okay? The colors and the shadow are of similar value, even though they're kind of complementary, the green and the red, right? And the colors in the light side are also kind of complementary. I would say kind of split-ish complementary, yellow, orange with a bluish color. They're also of similar value. Okay, so really practicing to see this will really aid you in plein air painting. The more you practice plein air painting, the more you will train your eye to be able to see this. You won't be fooled by your preconceptions with color, right? You will be able to see past that. And this took me a long time. Okay, when I first started gouache painting, I wouldn't see this. When I turned all my paintings black and white, they fell apart in value and kind of in color. But it took me actually a while to realize that sometimes, the sky might be the same value as the sienna rooftop of a house, but they're different hues, right? Or the grass might be the same value. The light side of the grass might be the same value as the bright color of a pinkish flower, right? So maybe the light side of the grass and the pinkish flower, when you paint that and turn it black and white, they'll be the same similar value, separated by some shadows, of course, by some shadows here and there, but their hues are so different and complementary, you still get that vibration when you enjoy a piece in color. Now, the second thing I want to bring up is when you find that different elements have similar value, and by the way, this will usually happen, or probably I would say always happen, in the shadow or in the light, okay? And what I mean by that is that you will not find the shadow part of something have the same value as something in the light. It just doesn't happen. Then your value structure will really break apart, okay? It just doesn't logically make sense. When something is in shadow, it cannot be the same value as that part of the object lit in light. The shadow will always be darker than that part of the object lit in light. And might as well add, the shadow will always be less intense in a saturation. Okay, if you make a shadow too saturated, it is going to kind of mess with your eye, okay? Because there's no light hitting that area, and light is what brings out purity, is what brings out that intensity in a color sometimes. And when not as much light is hitting the shadow color, you're just not going to get that purity in color. You're not going to get that intensity. So that's something always to keep in mind. But what I wanted to bring up was this. You can see my painting right now that even though I said that the red of the rocks in the shadow, and the green of those foliage all in shadow are of similar value, if not almost about the same, I am still shifting slightly, ever so slightly, not too much, shifting in subtle color temperature, meaning I'm playing with slightly warmer greens with a little bit more yellow, and slightly cooler greens with a little bit more blue in the greens, all the while not breaking my value structure, okay? So I'm looking at that whole mass right there, that mass of trees that you see. I look at that as one big mass. All right, one big mass, one big shape. I think shape and mass are slightly different. I'm interchanging them right now, but I look at that as one big mass. Let's say mass. I also look at that whole rock facade in shadow as one big mass. Even though you see that there's one rock slightly in front and one rock slightly in back, I look at that big shadow mass all in one, okay? I also see the river as all in one mass. And those rocks, okay, you see those rocks in the bottom right corner. Even though there's lots of tiny pebbles, there's lots of tiny pebbles, and you might be, overwhelmed with how to paint those. How do I paint all those tiny pebbles in one small study? The answer, you don't. You look at it as one big mass, and I guarantee you that will save you so much headache. When you squint at that reference photo, you can see that it's basically all one value and one shape, okay? So that's why I always put the reference photo as a small reference so that you can see what I'm seeing. I'm not looking at all that detail. But going back to my point again, okay, I'm shifting ever so slightly in color temperature within the hue, okay? Let's add that within the hue. So for example, I'm shifting from a slightly warmer to cooler green, either adding a little bit more yellow or a little bit more blue. That value I put down right there was too light, okay? So that did not work, right? What I just did now broke the value structure. It doesn't make sense with the light logic in my painting, so I hope I fixed that. But let's keep going. In the rock facade in shadow, I'm shifting between a warmer and cooler red. As well as in the light side of the rocks being lit, I'm shifting between some permanent yellow deep, a warmer yellow with a little bit of cadmium orange, and some white, right? To make sure that value is the correct value. And so because yellow and orange are neighbors, I'm not shifting my color drastically, but just ever so slightly so that they're still harmonious. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you want to add a little bit of color vibration and a little more interest in your painting, think about how to subtly shift in color temperature in the same or similar hues, right? Because they're similar hues, they're going to be harmonious. So as you can see here, here's my finished painting. It took me about 25 minutes, I would say, because it's a quick, small study. But I just want to show you the actual scenery. And as my phone adjusts, you can see how those values are working. You can really see now how that orange is pretty saturated, and it is about the same value as that really rich blue sky. You can also see how the greens, if you squint, you really can't tell the edge between the edge of the trees and the rocks in shadow. And that means that they are quite similar in value. And to prove this, I will turn this black and white just so you can see how simple that value structure is. Now I'm going to show you my painting one more time so you can see the color a little bit more frontal. Now when I turn it black and white, you can see that the value structure is also very similar. I've grouped my shadows together and I've grouped the lights together. So in value-wise, it's not exactly the most contrasting painting, but it is a very simple painting in terms of masses and value. Now, if I were to critique my own painting, I would say that I should have a few more harder edges. The reason why I feel like it's reading a little mushy is because I didn't have the time to kind of maybe clarify edges here and there. So that's what I would do if I were to take this painting to a larger, more refined study. But I hope that you understand the points that I wanted to illustrate in this short, but I hope informative tutorial. This is a really, really fun technique, or I guess topic or concept you can practice once you really first get down the importance of creating a painting with proper value structure. You can play around with distinguishing different elements in your painting, not only through value contrast, but through subtle and slightly varying hue and temperature contrast and shifts to create interest in your painting. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to watch my other tutorials on gouache and digital painting you can find on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Instagram, Gumroad, and YouTube, and check out my site, tiffaniemang.com. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'll catch you in the next one.